Hey everyone, Tactics here with another Season 1 Mythic Plus guide, where in this video I'll be going over some of the harder trash pulls that exist from a tank's perspective in the first season of Dragonflight and how to get through them while being as safe as possible. If you're interested in a similar video, I'll going over some of the more harder bosses that exist in the first season, or even just talking over how to handle each of the different Mythic Plus affixes. You can check those out both on my channel or linked down in the description below as well. Now, just for time's sake, of course, I'm not going to be able to cover every single difficult trash pull that exists, so I tried to compile here some of the ones that I've received the most kind of questions about, both down in the comments section or over in my Discord channel, which is also linked below if you're interested in joining that. If I didn't cover a certain trash pull that you're having difficulty with or struggling with, please do leave a comment down below, and hopefully I can help you out. Otherwise, let's start off with probably one of the most notorious trash packs in the entire season here, the final pull of Temple of the Jade Serpent. Now you have 4 mobs here that do a ton of tank damage with 3 minions of doubt. Of course, they have that Dark Claw shadow hit on your tank, and they also have the Haunting Shaw here that has that Haunting Gaze shadow hit on your tank. Now, notably, the Dark Claws can be micro-kited or backstepped. If you're not familiar with what that is, basically when they cast the ability, you can get yourself out of range, and that will cause the ability to go off, not do any damage, and go on cooldown. This is highlighted a lot in Halls of Valor. If you watch my Halls of Valor video, I talk about that a lot for a lot of the frontal abilities in that dungeon. But this obviously is not a frontal ability, it's a targeted ability, but the same thing applies. Now, the Haunting Shaw is a different problem because the Haunting Gaze itself is not actually backsteppable. It's just a ranged targeted attack. So you either have to commit defensives to that in particular, or you have to commit a stop on the Haunting Gaze, which is quite quick, so that can be difficult. One thing you'll note, and actually I'll play the video here, is that usually these Dark Claws are a little bit desync. See there, one Dark Claw went off, and now you're going to see the other 2 go off shortly after that. So basically what you can do when you come into this pack initially is if you do an AoE stun of some sort, like a leg sweep, Chaos Nova, Shockwave, before anything does any of the casts, you might be able to actually sync up all 3 Dark Claws, which can be both good and bad, right? So it means that you only need to backstep whenever all of them start casting the Dark Claws, or potentially that you could AoE stop all the Dark Claws. So that is pretty risky. I would recommend just backstepping and not trying to AoE stop the Dark Claws. But it also means that if you mess up, you will just get one shot because 3 Dark Claws just hit you, right? As a prop warrior, you have the added advantage of being able to spell reflect every other cast of Dark Claws. So if you're able to sync them all up, you can do a ton of damage in this pack with spell reflect. But still, even if you're not spell reflecting, I think it is easier to backstep them if they're all together here. Then you're going to see the next 2 kind of go off, and I'm going to backstep it here, and this is kind of an example. You're going to have 2 go off here in a second. There they are, and I just kind of sidestep out of the way. Now, there are 2 ways to backstep. You can do what I did there, which was I strafed away. That'll let you get more distance, but you can also just kind of immediately start backpedaling. Usually with a spell like Dark Claw, it's a relatively small range, so backpedaling should be enough, but strafing just gets you a little bit further and gives you that little bit more comfortability. Now, and when it comes to the Haunting Shaw, you see initially I do have a defensive running to deal with these Haunting Gazes, so whether that's a wall of some kind, in this case I have Shield Block running because it is a direct spell attack, so you can block it. If you have AMS, IBF, if you have like an Ardent running, IFT, right, chaining those cooldowns, you can let the Haunting Gaze attack go off. However, once you actually run out of abilities to use for that Haunting Gaze, you do want to start committing stops if you can on that Haunting Shaw, just to ensure that you are not getting killed by that Haunting Gaze, which of course can't be backstepped. Things like Hodge, things like Kidney are really good on the Shaw here, and it's relatively low health compared to everything else in this pack, so it should die first. You just want to make sure that you keep an eye on that. Other than that, you need to just kind of move around in a circle a bit, avoiding the minions of doubt, picking up these Shaws that spawn. And one thing to note, obviously, is that the damage can get very high, even for the tank, when these Shaws are dying. So we try not to kill them all at the same time. As you can see, we did sync up the Dark Claws now, which makes it a little bit easier for me to deal with. So we have all these Shaws going out, and there is a lot of damage when these Shaws die. So just be aware of that as well. Ideally, try and stagger them, right? That's what happens when you kill all the Shaws at the same time with a bursting. Kind of spooky, kind of scary, lots of damage, but otherwise, that's how you would handle that. Avoid those Dark Claws, commit defenses for the Haunting Gaze, use AoE CCs if needed, try and sync them up, and then use that backstep to avoid all of that damage. Now, let's move into a dungeon with quite a few different trash pulls that are difficult, Azure Vault here. So I'm going to cover a few trash pulls in this dungeon. A lot of these trash pulls are kind of high coordination pulls as well, so they may not be the best for your pug groups, but in case anyone wants to try something crazy, or you're doing this with like a coordinated group and you're wondering, okay, how do I actually live these pulls, I'll cover them here for you. So this is the very first pull. What we end up doing is pulling everything in this first room here, including the 3 stony guys in the middle. So to group initially, I go over to the whelpling, charge to him, kind of hit these guys a little bit, and notice these guys are marked, and that's for individual kicks because those guys will tend to cast initially first. I'll leap across, pull the other pack, and then run to the middle to pick up the rock guys who have now spawned. So we have individual kicks side of those first guys. I think, yeah, we do end up having a couple go off because these guys cast very early for some reason. Not the end of the world. We just commit some defensive CDs here. And basically how these Crystal Furies work, and this will be notable for the rest of this dungeon as well, is that they will never actually cast Piercing Shard at the same time as another one. They'll always cast one at a time. So what we do is we assign single target stops to the 3 Furies, and then we have like either AoE stops or like beam and stuff like that to stop the actual flower cast from going off, because those guys will sync up, whereas the rock guys won't. And you don't want to be like DRing everything with CCs and stuff like that. Another thing to note is I'm pointing these guys off to the side here in case one of the Piercing Shard frontals ever does go off. So I'm not like frontaling all the ranged DPS or healer or anything like that. Make sure it's pointing off to the side. And if a cast ever actually does go off, remember that the initial hit is actually the scariest part of it. The dot, it'll linger for a while, but really that initial hit is a big blast of damage to the tank. So you want to mitigate that if you know you're going to get hit. And in a pinch, you can actually use the wall at the front of the room where you come in here. Actually, I'll rewind here. You can actually LOS around this, the Piercing Shards. Obviously, again, watch the pathing because the shard cast will go off. It just won't hit you if you're LOS. So moving back forward, sorry. So you can see we're just kind of alternating CCs here. We have one person assigned. The beam can help with the lashers, and that frees us up to use other AoE CCs to actually stop the Furies here. One DPS again assigned to one Fury, me assigned to one Fury, and another DPS assigned to the 3rd Fury there. So everyone is assigned, or 3 people rather, are assigned to each of the Furies here, just to make sure we prevent that Piercing Shard cast from actually going off. Unlike the Dark Claw cast, right, this is not backsteppable. It's just a massive cone, but can LOS it like I mentioned. See, one does go off there, but it is only one, so it's not the end of the world. We were all bursting a little bit, but Spirit Link is OP, so we're able to get through that fine. Now, another similar pull is this pull after the first boss here. So you've got 4 Furies in this pull, so similarly, we assign one person to each Fury, and actually that's the first mistake I make right here. This pull is going to go a little bit weird. We still get through it, but do not use your mobility right at the beginning to group this pull. I know you want to, I know I want to, I just did it here. You're gonna see why in a second, why that's very bad and almost gets me killed. But basically you want to get in here relatively quickly, but like if you're not here when this pack starts spawning, it's not at the end of the world, right? As long as the tank's the closest person, you can easily group it up and pull them to this wall here. Now, why do we ever pull to this wall? The same reason I talked about at the first pull here. You can LOS the Piercing Shard. So because there's 4 Furies, you're going to run out of stops. It's inevitable. You can use these ridges here to LOS the Fury cast, particularly when this big guy starts casting that circle that you want to get out of, and maybe people can't hit their stops because they're running away from the circle. So what you can do is you can LOS around these ridges when that actually happens. So again, we're going to assign one person to each Fury here. I'm going to pull them towards the edge of the platform, and our goal here is to make sure that we're stopping the individual cast there. So we have one stop there. I'm assigned to stop X here. I use my fear. A note on the fear too for any prot wars, like how do you make sure you hit the right target on a big pull like this? Fear is target capped. One little thing about the intimidating shout fear is that it will always fear your current target, as well as then whatever number of targets up to the cap within range. So if you want to fear a specific target as a single target stop, just make sure you're targeting that mob. Press the fear button, you will always hit them. Then we have the shards. Again, we have stops here. I LOS around that corner. Nothing happens, no damage. The blue one got the cast off, no one got hit. Notably, of course, as well, because you're going to be LOSing, melee and people relatively close, you never want to dodge forwards out of that circle here. Everyone you saw dodge to the side or backwards, just to make sure that any potential frontals that went off did not hit anyone but the tank. That's why the tank is always moving this direction. Everyone else is dodging either this way or backwards. Now we're going to be using AoE stops here. See, the blind's a little bit late. I think we overlapped CCs coming up here. Yeah, I already have 2 stacks here. And this is where not having my heroic leap almost messes me up, right? I tried to get out of LOS, but that's really a spot where you'd want to either use a big speed, like heroic leap, like I mentioned, I'd be able to leap here and step out of LOS. Or if you're a bit of a slower tank spec, you need to be aware that, you know, I need to have a safe position. And so what I should have done here probably is after LOSing this pack, I should have started slowly dragging the pack to like here. Slowly, so that the distance I have to cover if I need to LOS is much less. So again, the big damage here is actually coming from the initial hits. So I have Spell Effect up to mitigate and a big Ignore Pain, but you're going to see I'm going to drop pretty low there. But luckily I popped my shield wall here, and it's just enough to get me through this because the dot is not actually terribly dangerous. It's that initial hit combined with everything else that you're really scared of. So again, we got a misery stop here, and we're just slowly kiting. You have so many of these ridges back here to work with. LOSing, just use these as you need to, especially later in the pull like this when you're just kind of running dry on stops, right? Use this as much as you need to. You can see I step out a little early here to force this mob to still be LOS'd by this ridge. So he's about to cast, and then I can still use this ridge, though I have Stormbolt back again anyways. But still, that's a little tip you can do as well. If you LOS really far, you can actually run back and use the same ridge again. But don't feel crunched for space, right? There's still even another ridge behind me, I believe. And you can just kind of chain into these elementals when you feel safe to do so. So that goes a little bit wrong, but that's kind of how you recover from a pull like that. Mitigate initial hits is more important than the actual dot itself. I'm also not even running Spell Block here. I think this was a dungeon where I accidentally didn't run both Spell Block and Heroic Leap CDR. Pretty good in Azure Vault, so those can help, especially with pulls like this. Drag the pack a little bit more closer to your LOS spot. Like the beginning of this pull, this is kind of an ideal spot for me to drag to. So whenever I used up this pillar, this is kind of the positioning for the next pillar that I should drag the pack to. Don't just park yourself right past the pillar like I did here. I parked here. I did not have Heroic Leap back. Almost ran into some serious problems, so note that. So that's how you handle these Piercing Shard guys. And then let's talk about the big mini boss in the second boss room, because this guy's also pretty dangerous. Notice here we're pulling a pack, and I'm going into the actual lieutenant himself. A couple things to note, though, with this mob in particular, is that you can actually just kind of range the heck out of him. You can see there, Ice Cutter's going off, no damage. So, weird thing about this room. The Vault Guards have Ice Cutter. You can't backstep or microkite their Ice Cutter. They will hit you no matter how far away you are. The Scalebane Lieutenant's Ice Cutter, however, for some reason, you can backstep or avoid it or microkite it or whatever. You take no damage from it. It's weird. It does a lot of damage, and of course he has that big damage amp around him as well, so you will want to make sure you're avoiding that. And the other thing, you can avoid this Spellfrost Breath. You see I just walk right out of it. I'm taking no damage. It is a cone, however, so be aware. You see I'm doing a straight line. I didn't shift. I didn't strafe away in either direction, right? I'm not turning this mob at all. I'm walking away in a straight line to keep that breath straight so that melee or anyone else doesn't accidentally get strafed by it at all. So big damage mitigation there. What you will want to note and be careful of is whenever you pull Vault Guards with a Scalebane Lieutenant, because again, Ice Cutter there, 0 damage. No damage taken by that Ice Cutter, but if that was Vault Guard, I'd be getting hit by that Ice Cutter, and it would be damage amped by the Lieutenant circles. You're going to see here in a second, basically the play is, you stay in with the Lieutenant, you backstep his Ice Cutter, you run away from the breath, and then you just kind of like don't really hit him very much, honestly. Like he stays put. He's grouped with the mobs. Everyone else is hitting him, but I'm kind of not really. I don't have a ton of uptime on this mob, right? And that's perfectly fine because he's a very dangerous mob, right? He amps the damage of everyone else. You're gonna see here, there's the breath. Trying to keep it a straight line, but this guy, that is how much damage just a Vault Cutter can do, and you can see like how far away I was from that guy, right? Like clearly, this would have been like a backstep in any world, but that there gets the damage amp. If you have like a bunch of those, as you can see here, like if all 3 of these guys were amped by that would be rough. See, there you go. I'm still getting hit by these guys very far away. Luckily not damage amp, but I'm running with CDs up, grouping up the pack here. Again, that cone is just a big frontal line. I have to deal with this Runekeeper kick over here, but basically I'm able to kind of just go and group up the next pack and like let my DPS deal with that guy. I've got full aggro on him. I'm not really worried about losing aggro, and he just kind of is a big target dummy at that point for everyone else. So big thing for this guy, just kind of stay away from him, right? That's kind of the moral of the story in this trash area here. Now, another pull in Shadowmoon, actually, one of the first pulls in Shadowmoon just before the first boss, these triple ritual bone pulls. A lot of people have been messaging me about this pull in particular because that Void Slash ability, well, it is technically microkiteable or backsteppable, again, whatever you want to call it. It actually has a bit of range to it, which is a little weird compared to some of the other ones that we've talked about. The Temple one, briefly talked about the Halls of Valor ones as well. So you either need to commit to going very far with like a big gap closer, like Heroic Leap, for example, or like a speed like Death's Advance, Pony Away, whatever, or you need to commit to popping defensives and stopping them. Now, these guys do function like the Piercing Shard guys in Azure Vault, so they will never Void Slash at the same time. That means that you can individually stop them, but though look at how quick this cast is, right? This is a very, very fast cast, so it can be difficult to reliably stop them, especially when you don't know the order they're going to slash you in, because again, they're going to stagger themselves, and one of them's going to cast first. Who knows which one? So in this case, it was this one on the right here. But what you can do is you stagger defensive. So instantly here, I'm spell block. Usually, actually, I'm not spell block in this dungeon, but I think I was this time. Get that mob back here, and you see. That's what happens when I was not paying attention. I was trying to get aggro on the mob. Did almost die, so be careful here. And then basically you're going to stagger defensives. Shield wall still running, so I let that one go off. Spell block is still running, so I'm going to let these go off. And I'm probably going to end up stopping one of these later ones here. We chain that into an external here with time dilation to get me through this set. And now it's probably when you're going to start seeing me use things like single target or even AoE stops to prevent some of these casts here from going off, especially because now I know the actual order. There is an example of a backstep actually working. Again, it's not very reliable. You're going to see one probably fail to work in a second here. There was an AoE stop on one. There's one failing to work right there, right? So if you just rewind the sequence, I'm using AoE stops here. This one I'm going to backstep successfully with a strafe away, no damage taken. This next one I'm going to stop with a shockwave here. There we go, shockwave stop. This next one I'm going to backstep unsuccessfully. So you can see kind of the whole process and how it's not consistent, right? And you don't, as a tank, you really hate things that are inconsistent. What I would recommend doing here is something kind of similar to the strategy with this mini boss area is get your aggro. Initially, you can kind of do some individual stops on mobs like you do in some of the Piercing Shard packs, right? AoE stops, commit a defensive to kind of eat a 1 or 2, whatever. And then from there, put some slows down and just create space, right? Just get the heck away. Don't worry about there's another failed backstep. Don't worry about actually staying in the pack. Just like leave, get slows on the pack, maybe big like AoE CC or whatever. See, I'm just committing defensives again here. But you don't need to be in this pack, right? You have aggro, especially when they start getting below 50% health. Your aggro is solid. Just get the heck out of there, be safe, keep slows on the pack, and just get them down. And that's just, in general, much more consistent and what I would recommend doing over just trying to backstep and being unsuccessful. Because this one is a bit weird. It is possible, but they seem to have a bit more range, a bit longer arms, I guess, than some of the other mobs that are micro-kiteable. So keep that in mind. Now, we have a big pull here in Algeth'ar Academy. So this is the last pull of Algeth'ar Academy, pretty common last pull, at least in higher keys, where you pulled this 3-pack over here with 1 Invoker and a Restorer and 1 Echo Knight, with the 4-pack in front of the last boss's room. So another Invoker, another Restorer, and 2 more Echo Knights. Now, the biggest thing here is making sure you have kicks on the invokers for the arcane missiles only. You don't want to kick the arcane bombs. Those can be used kind of like in the ring of Ruby life pools to hit the pack, do some damage, stop some spells, right? That kind of thing. So very useful for that. And then you want to have AoE or single target stops or both, preferably on the Echo Knights for those whirlwinds, because walking into those whirlwinds, you're going to see is actually like one of the more dangerous things, combined with the arcane damage coming from the invokers as well. It's those things that are going to kill you. So what you're going to end up doing, kicks on the invokers. You can group it here. I'm going to hit these mobs. We have a kick assigned. Get in here, LOS. Again, we have kicks assigned. Get them in around the corner here. And we're going to start using CDs here. And I think this is where we actually missed a stop. I think I actually shockwaved early here and didn't actually get the stop. So this should have been a shockwave probably to stop this. We let the arcane bombs go off because you can use this to damage the pack. But you're going to see how much damage these whirlwinds do, right? 2 whirlwinds going up. I try to use a stop. I get very low with a shield wall up, and then we time dilate right after it. And that's just the damage of whirlwind, right? So you want to be very careful. Don't commit to try and get a stop like that through a whirlwind. not worth for sure. So from here, you're going to just see basically like whirlwinds are going to go off. I'm going to move slightly backwards, like around this corner, and try and not eat any ticks from these whirlwinds, right? So there we go. I'm eating a couple ticks here, but then these go off. And these is where you would be assigning AoE stops, right? You have kicks and you can defensive any missiles that you don't have kicks for. But really the Equinite whirlwind damage is not damage that you should be taking. As you can see, it gets way comfier here when I just stop taking the whirlwind damage. So even as a tank, don't feel like you're invincible and able to stand these whirlwinds. Commit more AoE stops. We probably could have stopped a bit better. We were a little bit out of sync there with our AoE stops. But then as soon as all the casters are actually dead, the invokers, which are the guys that are spamming arcane missiles at your tank usually, but sometimes they hit a ranged DPS or any DPS rather, which can be scary. Once those guys are actually dead and they have significantly less health, you can just drag these guys into boss and you get some extra funnel or whatever for your comp. So that can be pretty helpful there. But biggest thing, don't eat those whirlwinds. Not worth for sure. And that frees you up to commit defensives instead on any arcane missiles that you don't have kicks for, as opposed to having to commit defensives because you decided to walk into a whirlwind. Not worth for sure. And they have a pretty like clear circle as well. Let me go here. You can see like very, very clear circle that's hitting the whirlwind. So you can actually still cleave the whirlwind mobs if you just pull the pack right next to where they're whirlwinding if you don't have a stop for whatever reason. And that brings us to Halls of Valor. Now, I'm not going to talk about the Herja pull too much. It's just that's a pretty simple backstep pull. The main thing is just make sure you're going in straight lines because those are frontal, so don't be too crazy with it. But I'm going to talk about the bears here because a lot of people like pulling all the bears together. It's a pretty dangerous tank pull because they do a stacking damage amp on you, and I'm going to talk about a bit how to avoid that. Basically, there's a bit of a dead zone when you're trying to actually fight these guys. You want to be far enough away that they can't actually hit you with most of their abilities, but you want to be close enough that they won't actually charge to you, right? Because they have a charge, and similar to like a warrior charge or other charge abilities, is that there is a range where they don't work if they're close enough. So you want to be within that little dead zone of where they can't hit you with their abilities, and you're too close for them to charge to you. And that kind of lets you kind of reset stacks or get very few stacks and take very little damage from these mobs just in general. Now, doing this becomes much easier when you have the full move speed buff, which is why you see people go Herja first, then go Fenrir, and then pull both the Grizzlies here and also the Bulls sometimes. So what you're going to see is something that most sane people don't do. Especially on a bursting explosive week, but we actually pull all the Grizzlies and all the Bulls here. This was a test pull. It actually worked out relatively well, to be honest with you. This is the first time ever I was doing this pull too. So let's basically pull all the bears, and I run over here and I pull all the bulls too. Really fun. But basically, the bulls kind of function similarly, where the piercing horns, which is what you're scared of, is also like you can just outrange it, like it's back and microkitable, whatever. So you're not going to take damage from that. And so because you're already doing that with the Grizzlies anyways, you can just pull all these guys together, and this gives melee something to hit always, because the bulls will be kind of desynced with their stomps. So there's always something for the melee to hit here. You can see I'm kind of backstepping away. I've only got 2 stacks. I think I'll get refreshed here. Oh no, I do drop stacks here. So you can see like there's like 5 or 6 bears in this pull, right? But I only got the 2 stacks there. Then I drop stacks. It's not like they're not hitting. Don't recommend charging into the circle, by the way. That was bad. But you can see that I'm actually like getting very low stacks of this ability and then resetting the stacks. So here I'm starting to go up a little bit, right? And letting them get closer to me. But you want to be just away from these mobs. And it is hard to see with these trees. Again, hashtag delete trees. We hate them. I'm getting up to 6 stacks here. He got a little bit far away. You saw that bear did charge to me right there. But luckily, he did not actually hit me with his ability to stack me up a little bit. And I'm able to kind of reset my stacks again here. And that's kind of the name of the game here, right? You never want to get too high on stacks, and when you do start getting high in the stack, that's when you start want to commit defensive CDs, maybe AoE stops to kind of guarantee, say a shockwave right here. And don't get me wrong, this is still a relatively dangerous pull. I mean, this is all exceptionally dangerous for tanks, but relatively dangerous for other people because you can't just get one shot by these stomps. But other than these stomps, right, there is really no other damage going around. So you really want to just be kind of circling this pack as I'm doing here, cycling in stops, staying relatively close, but not right up in the face of the pack. And that will actually let you reset stack. And it's much, much easier, trust me, when you have this speed buff. We do it in this area here because sometimes some of these rocks or some of these hills or some of the areas over in the where the bears actually are can be problematic. And like for some reason, the bears will just decide, hey, you know what? I'm going to one-shot your melee DPS instead of you for some reason. So That's why we do it in this clear area over here. Obviously you have the tree problems, but hopefully you guys kind of saw what I was doing there, kind of running in a circle to control these mobs while keeping them kind of tight enough for melee DPS and range DPS to cleave them all down. And then once you start getting deeper into the pack, you can use AoE CCs, you can use personals to kind of get through any higher stacks you get of this debuff. But there it is, guys. Hopefully this video helps you time some keys, and if it does, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like it. If you have any questions at all by any of the pulls that I covered here, or maybe some other trash pulls that you are struggling with in Dragonflight Season 1, leave a comment down below and I'll do my best to answer. You can always also check me out on my Twitch channel at Tactics, where I stream all of my high key runs as well as Mythic rating from a tank's perspective, and I'm happy to help you out over there as well. I do want to also give a big shout out to all of my supporters over on Patreon. Without you, this wouldn't be possible, so I appreciate it a lot. Anyways, though, that's all for this video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.